In Challenge 365 this week, you read the book of Esther. And Esther is a great book. And I told you last week, we've invited Esther to come today and just share. So what I want you to do now is kind of in your mind, step back to the Persian Empire. In the capital city of Susa, somewhere about 450 years before Christ came. We're sitting in a room that's known only to the Jewish community. You and other Jewish believers around you have been personally invited to attend a rare private audience with the ex-queen of Persia, Esther. And you read her amazing story this week. I want you to listen to Esther, a woman who is now in her 50s, who once again uses her original Jewish name of Hadassah to take the time this morning to set the record straight.
Thank you for honoring me with your presence today. It's been a long time since I've had the privilege of standing before you, and I'm probably more nervous now than I was any time I was your queen. But it's time I broke my silence. I've been hearing too many rumors and gossip and untrue stories of what happened to me before, during, and after I was queen. Please take heed to what I'm going to say. For you too may be called to step out in courage, boldness, and obedience. And if I can encourage you to trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding, then love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, and your strength, and then obey him, my time with you will be well spent. I've taken the liberty of writing down everything I'm going to say in the scroll. So long after I am gone, you can look back and remember, and I will leave it with one of you here today. First of all, let me make it perfectly clear. I have no hard feelings of any kind towards Queen Mother Vashti. Now that her son Artaxerxes is our king and she's our queen mother, I only honor and respect her. If the truth be known, I too might have done what she did. It all started on the 7th day of the banquet prior to our invading Greece. King Xerxes, who I also learned over time was proud and impulsive, was in high spirits from wine and commanded Vashti to parade before the public gathering of all men. Well, as you know, this is against our Persian custom for a woman to appear before an all-male gathering. And knowing the king as I do, he and all the men were most likely drunk and unruly. But because King Xerxes was embarrassed and therefore angry that she refused his order, he issued a royal decree that could not be repealed. Queen Vashti could never again enter his presence. But God used this to set in motion an exquisite plan to save our people. I am humbled to think that he allowed me to be part of his plan. We are all God's workmanship, created to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And I am here to tell you that all we have to do is be willing, keep our focus on him, and then be obedient. It all started when my parents had made the decision to not go back to Jerusalem. My father was well established in his business, and it was a dangerous journey to go back to our homeland. But then tragically, I lost both my parents. I felt so alone. I never believed that I would be an orphan. In my anguish, I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. Though I was so sad, I felt his peace as I knew the Lord was with me. I was not afraid. for his love does endure forever. I knew from my parents' teachings that though I was now an orphan, I had been knit together in my mother's womb, and I was fearfully and wonderfully made. God's works are wonderful. I knew that full well. I trusted that all the days ordained for me were written in his book. And God answered my prayers as he provided the loving care from my cousin Mordecai. He raised me and trained me as if I was his own daughter. After Vashti was exiled, Mordecai informed me that the king was looking for young virgins to spend a year in beauty treatments, and then one would be chosen to take Vashti's place as queen. Mordecai told me that if I was taken to the king's palace, I was not to reveal my nationality or my family background. That is when he suggested I go by the name of Esther instead of my given name of Hadassah. I knew I needed to honor Mordecai's wishes. I trusted him completely, but more than that, I trusted my Father in heaven. And now I see by God's choice and design, I was taken. And as I walked into the grand palace, I found myself quietly reciting scripture I have been taught since I was a child. It calmed my anxious, nervous heart just to know that God would never leave me or forsake me, and he had a plan for me, for a future and a hope. I couldn't believe that I, an orphan, a simple Jewish girl, was going to be staying in the king's palace. But most of all, I just wanted to be used by God for his purposes. I wanted to be clay in the hand of our God, the great potter. I liked most everyone I met at the palace. They were all so nice to me. I had never seen such magnificent beauty. We were given foods I had never tasted before, and they gave me clothes that were well beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. In many ways, it felt like a dream, but I really missed Mordecai. Yet through the helpers that were assigned to me, we were able to exchange messages now and then. I was given 7 maids to care for my every need, and as I spent 6 months of beauty treatments of oil and myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. God opened the door to the hearts of others as I was favored by all. But then, on the 10th month in the 7th year of King Xerxes' reign, I was finally summoned to spend an evening with the king. Though I had a nervous and fearful heart, God spoke to my heart saying, "Be strong, do not fear." Of course, at the time, I could not see God's plan or purpose, but God allowed me to find favor with the king, and he crowned me his queen, and he gave me a big banquet in my honor. But for those of you who were around during this time, you may remember not long after this, my cousin Mordecai heard about a plot to assassinate the king. Mordecai told me about it, and I was able to tell the king. When it was investigated and found to be true, the 2 guilty officials were hanged, and all this was recorded in his own history book, his chronicles, in the presence of the king. Now, this is an important thing to remember, for as you will hear me share, God uses everything in our lives for his plan and his purposes. I did not see the king very often, and I could never go to him unless he requested my presence. Oh, but I did get to know Haman, an arrogant, prideful, evil man who the king elevated to second in command above all the other nobles. He demanded that everyone bow down to him and pay him honor. I knew that my cousin Mordecai would never bow down to anyone but our God. But what I didn't know was how this evil man Haman tricked my husband, the king, into signing a death decree. It wasn't until my maids and helpers told me that Mordecai was mourning at the city gates, wailing loudly and bitterly, wearing sackcloth and ashes, that I came to hear what had really happened. And because Haman knew that Mordecai was a Jew, and because he was furious that Mordecai would not bow down to him, Haman convinced my husband to sign a decree to destroy all my people, all the Jews. And then Haman cast lots, selecting the exact day and month for this to happen. My mind could not even fathom that on one day that all my people, our people, would be killed. One of my helpers gave me the written words of the edict and then told me that Mordecai urged me to go into the king's presence and beg for mercy for our people. He was asking me to go before the king. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces knew that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he will be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter and spare his life. Not only that, it had been 30 days since I had been with the king. I sent the message to my dear cousin Mordecai that this was an impossibility. Though I was the queen, I still could be killed. Mordecai sent back his answer to me saying, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come in a royal position for such a time as this." In my weakness and distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. I love you, Lord. You are my strength, my fortress, my deliverer, my rock in whom I take refuge. You are my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to you, Lord, who is worthy of praise. Please save my people from our enemies. And if I am the one to be used by you for your plans and purposes, I am your humble servant. Please use me. When I focused on my God and laid out all my anxious thoughts, a peace that transcends all understanding came upon me. I instructed Mordecai to gather all the Jews who were in Susa to fast and to pray for me. They were not to eat or drink for 3 days, and my maids and I were going to do the same for them. When the 3 days were past, I would go to the king, even though it was against the law, for I knew now that I had to be willing to lay down my life for my people. So I said to myself, if I perish, I perish. The Lord Almighty was wonderful in counsel and magnificent in wisdom when he laid out a plan for me. I knew all I had to do was be obedient. I put on my royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. I remember this as if it was yesterday. The king was sitting high on his throne, facing me. My heart was beating so loudly, I thought the echo might resound off the marble walls and reach his ears. But then he held out the gold scepter for me to touch. I could barely hold back my tears as I hurried down the aisle and reached out and touched the scepter. After I took a deep breath, I invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Later, when they came, my king asked me to state my petition. He said he was even willing to give me half of his kingdom. But instead, with God providing the wisdom and the patience, I invited them to a second banquet that very next night. And it would be then I would answer the king's question. What you might not know is after this first banquet, Haman left the palace in high spirits, but then seeing my cousin at the gate, who did not rise and show any fear of his presence, was so filled with rage that, urging from family and friends, he decided to build a gallows 75 feet high to hang Mordecai. And then miraculously, that same night, I believe the Lord kept the king awake. And since he could not sleep, he stayed up and just happened to read in his chronicles on the exact page where it was recorded that Mordecai had exposed the assassination plot I had told about to you earlier. The king asked, and then it was confirmed, that no honor or recognition had been given Mordecai for this amazing, courageous deed he had done. God's timing was perfect, for it was about then that Haman came rushing into the court, planning to talk about the gallows he built. But instead, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Well, Haman, thinking the king was, of course, talking about himself, described this elaborate spectacle where the person of high honor would sit on a horse the king had just ridden, wearing a royal robe, a royal crest on his head, and being led through the city while others proclaimed, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." I wish I could have seen Haman's face when the king instructed him, "Do this, just as you have suggested, for Mordecai, the Jew, and do not neglect anything you have recommended." Well, Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, crying out in anger and dismay to his family. Yet almost immediately it was time for him to return for the second banquet I had prepared. God was so gracious. Every detail of the banquet was again perfectly executed. Finally, the moment arrived. While we were having wine, my king asked me my petition and my request. I quietly asked God to give me strength and to steady my knees so they did not give way. Then I answered, "If I have found favor with you, O king, and it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." When he asked me who dared to do such a thing, I told him the adversary and the enemy was the vile Haman. I have never seen my king so angry. He could not even speak as he stomped out of the room into the palace garden. Haman immediately rushed over to my couch to beg for his life. I was frightened by his presence, and just as he fell forward to me, my husband was coming back into the banquet hall and yelled, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" Immediately he was pulled off me, and they covered his face, knowing he was condemned to death. The king was informed of the gallows Haman had built to hang Mordecai. Mordecai, the very one who spoke up to help the king and was just highly honored. So the king yelled to hang Haman on it, and it was only then that his fury subsided. Oh, through my tears of relief and thanksgiving, I praised my mighty God. It was that same day that the king gave me the estate of Haman. And since I explained the relationship between Mordecai and myself, and that I too was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, The king gave Mordecai his signet ring, taking Haman's place and becoming second in command. Yet I was still overwhelmed with grief for my people when I fell at the feet of the king, weeping, pleading with the king to end the evil plan Haman had devised. Oh, God went before me again, and the king extended the gold scepter. So I arose and begged him to overrule this edict. But the king could not revoke the decree. But he did give Mordecai the power and his ring to write a new law, giving the Jews the right to fight back. When that dreaded day arrived, there was much fighting. But our people killed only those who wanted to kill them, and they did not take any of our enemies' possessions, even though they could have. Later, Mordecai instituted the Feast of Purim, which you all know we celebrate still today. He wanted all of us to celebrate annually this time when the Jews got relief from their enemies and when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. We will always remember, for God, who is always in control, protected his people. He turned what was meant for evil into something good. I believe our descendants will celebrate this day with joy and feasting for many, many generations to come. Thank you for accepting my invitation and allowing me to take the time to set the record straight. So many of you here are younger than I, and if decades ago God could use a simple, young, orphaned Jewish girl for his plan and purposes, he can use you. Just remember to be willing to be used by God. Then love the Lord your God and keep your focus on him. And then with courage, boldness, and thanksgiving, step out in obedience and watch miracles happen. Now here, take this scroll and keep it in safe keepings so you will always remember. And may it remind you to be ready. To be ready to be used by him for his plan, his purposes, his glory for such a time as this. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Shalom, my brothers and sisters.